So good morning. Good morning to another lesson. Let's switch to English and let's start with today's lesson. Today will be hopefully a very interesting lesson. We are going to implement the homework that I gave you last week, the Trippin example, but we are going to implement it in a way that we haven't done before. We are going to very much focus on reactive programming. Reactive X, reactive programming, and I will show you a lot of neat tricks how you can implement a solution like that. As I told you before, today's lessons are super important for your final exam, because in your final exam you will need to write the kind of database-oriented application, and therefore the lesson or the exercise that we do today can be a kind of blueprint, at least partly. So if you understand what we do today, and if you remember how we do it, you are already quite well prepared for your final exam. So, I will record this session, obviously. You can re-watch it before your final exam in a few months. But stay with me, try to follow along, and ask as many questions as possible. Okay, let's get started. Can you remember what the requirements were from the homework from last week? Let me quickly summarize. We have a list of people here, a list of persons here, and we need to create an Angular application that contains routing. We need to have a route for finding a person. So we type in a name and the system should look in first name, middle name, last name, username for what we have typed in. We need to use a CSS Grid again, exercise from a previous week. And then, first time in this semester, we are going to access a web API. Now, accessing web API is something that we did in the last year already, multiple times. I've shown it to you multiple times. But today, we are going to do it in a professional way. I'm not saying that last year we did it unprofessionally, but we did it on a beginner level. Today, we are really using it to its full extent. We are adding error handling, we are adding a loading indicator, and we are doing it with minimal amount of code by using the possibilities of reactive extensions. So, content-wise, from the topic, this is nothing new, but the way we implement it today will be very much different from what we did last year. That's the goal, and I think with that, we can get started. Good. Let's create a new application, please. Do an ng new, and then let's see what we want to do. Sorry, ng new help. I always forget the options, so I always have to look it up. So ng new, what do we have to do? We want to create it in a directory, and the directory should be named 2023 10 Trippin, for instance, and I want to create it with routing. I want to skip the tests. Testing is not a topic today. I want standalone. You can remember we talked about standalone a lot. I want strict so that we have good type checking. I want SCSS styling. We are no beginners anymore. And I will call it Trippin. And I think that's good. So now the system will create the application for us. It's a kind of minimal application, not fully minimal, but without tests and things like that, and that is perfectly fine. So please follow along. Here you have the command. It's also in your HackMD workspace. I have the command there. You can also copy it from there and wait for a few seconds until npm will have finished installing all our dependencies. Okay, very good. So we created our app and I opened up the folder here in Visual Studio Code. It's a completely empty app, and the first thing that we typically do is we throw away all this marketing garbage that is inside of app component HTML. Please do so. The only thing that should remain here in app component HTML should be the router outlet. That's the only thing. Everything else is marketing garbage. Let's start the app in the background. So I will open up a terminal here and say npm start so that we have it running in the background. Yes, I will share my experience with Google. I'm fine with that. It's just an exercise. So if they're happy with it, they should have it. And then we are going to open up the browser. Here it is. and it will give me a blank page. That is good. I always look in the console if I have an error here. Always do that, please. Just to make sure. Sometimes you forget something, to make a stupid mistake, and then the console is your friend. Good. Are we good? Anybody need more time? Nice, very good. So the first thing that we can do is we can add a component in which we maintain or display the list of people that can be filtered. I will do exactly that. And I will also add the routes. So let's create the component. I hope you can remember how we create a component. This is something that you absolutely must know. We did it last year, we did it this year. It's an npx ng generate component, and I will call it people list. I recommend that you use the same name, but if you don't like this name, you can choose a different one. Okay, now we have the people list component. Here is the people list component, HTML, CSS, and TypeScript. Nothing new. So in app routes, we can define the routes. Let's do that. So the route should be path. Let me look up in my notes so that I can maybe share some code with you. Let's start with people as the URL. And this would be the component, the people list component. That looks pretty nice. And of course, if the user doesn't enter anything, I would like to redirect. Now GitHub Copilot will immediately suggest something, and this suggestion is pretty good. So these are our two routes that we have. Let me repeat again, because as I said today, this is important for your final exam. You must remember how to add a route. You must remember how to add a redirection from the empty path. These are two things that you must know, and you must not use. You should not use or need GitHub Copilot for that. So this is something that you have to have in your mind. Definitely. We practice this a lot, and I hope it is not a problem anymore. Good. So we have the route. If we go to our web application, it says people list works awesome. Works perfectly fine. Routing, check, done, perfect. Let's go to the people list component and maybe, first go to the app component HTML, and maybe we will add a nice header here where you say this is the Trippin application. Let's do it that way, and then go in the people list component, and here we say h2, header 2, and we say people. Let's check that. Works perfectly fine. This here comes from the top level app component. This here comes from the people list component. Everything works flawlessly. Any questions so far? There shouldn't be a lot of questions here, but if you have, don't hesitate to ask. You good? Perfect. Nice. I do not like the styling of this. Do you like the styling? I really don't like serif fonts. You know what serif fonts are? These are serif fonts. It looks like, I don't know, a very old newspaper. So let's give it a little bit nicer touch here. At least, I hope you will like the touch. Let's go to style CSS. Can you remember? Style CSS is the place where you define the global styles. Global styles are applied to every component in the entire application. So let's do that. Let's define some styles for the body. I would say a font family. Font family. Please choose a font family that you like. I like this one, but choose any font family that you like. Then let's make the body a width of 100% and do maybe a padding of 10 pixels. So let's take a look how it looks like. Okay, we have a little bit of a padding, but also it's very far away from the top. You see that one? So what we can do in order to make this one a little bit nicer, we can say generally all elements have a margin of 0. That resets all the margins. I don't know if you have known that, but with the star selector in a CSS, you can simply address all elements. So this simple thing here removes all the margins on all elements. So you never struggle with some margins, and you explicitly have to define the margins just as you would like to have them. See, now we have no margins between the different things, and I can show you that. If I click on that one, you will see a very important view here. Take a look at this down here, because here you see the margin and the padding and so on. So if I, for instance, click on the body, you see the padding here that we defined in CSS, but margin is 0. If I click on the H1, margin is 0. If I click on the app people list H2, margin is 0, and that is exactly what I want. So this is a kind of resetting, a global resetting of all margins. Useful, isn't it? Because now we are on a clean slate and can define whatever we want. For instance, we can say, hey, in front of an H1, we say margin top should be, oh, H1 will be on the very top, so we don't need top. Maybe a bottom, maybe 15 pixel, and an H2 should be a margin top with 25 pixels and a margin bottom with, guten Morgen, 10 pixels. Okay, sorry, I mistyped here. It should be 10px. And if you take a look, now, again, take a look at what we have. Do you see? Now we have a margin here. And if I take a look at the H2, we have a margin on top and we have a margin on the bottom. This view here is super, super, super nice to find problems with alignments. It's really, really very important, and I always have it on the right-hand side so that I can have a quick glance at my margins and so on. If you don't like the numbers that I used here, feel free to change it. Maybe it's a little bit too much with the 15 here. Maybe I will go for 10. But that's really being picky here. So that's fine. I think you got the idea, right? Good, very nice. I like that. Now, if we take a look at this website, if we have a longer text, the text will flow until the right margin of our website, and then we'll have a line break, and this will not look very nicely. Imagine that you have a large monitor. This will end up with a very, 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 very long line of text, and that doesn't look beautiful. What I would like to have is I would like to center the content of our website in the middle if our monitor is very, very large. So I want to have empty space here, and I want to have empty space here, and in the middle, nice in the middle with a maximum width, I want to have my content. Let me show you how we can do that. It's not super complicated. It's really rather simple, but I want to show you how this can be done. Remember that our app component here is called app root. See that one? This is our root app component. And if we take a look at the hierarchy of elements here, see that we have the body, and directly under the body we have this app root. This is our root component. So we can set up the styling here with this app root. And let me show you how we can do that. We can go into the style CSS. Here we are. And then we simply style the app root. Did you know that? That you can style Angular components with the Angular name? Yes, it works. It works really nicely. Now what we can do is we can say, give me a max width of 1024 pixels. Yes, you can make it 1000, but we are programmers, so power of 2 is always nicer. And then we can say, give me a margin left of, and now comes the trick, auto, and give me a margin right, auto. Nice, isn't it? Let's check if it works. No, it doesn't work. It doesn't work because this thing has the wrong display mode. You maybe know that there are different display modes. There is an inline display mode where you have multiple things right to each other. And the correct display mode to achieve this is a display block. And if you do a display block, now it looks very nicely. You see, if it's smaller than 1024 pixels, It's nicely aligned on the left-hand side. But if I make it larger, you see now I'm crossing the boundary. See? Works perfectly fine. And if I visualize that, you see that our content does not spread over the entire website, but we have, if I click here on the app root and scroll down here again, you see that the left margin and the right margin are automatically calculated, and we have it beautifully in the middle of our page. Nice, isn't it? Yep. I hope you like it. Very nice. Let me check if I forgot something. No, I think we are good. Does it work for everybody so far? Yeah. If you don't like the styling, make a different styling, but this is a very, very common approach, and sometimes people struggle reaching exactly that effect in CSS, but it's really not complicated. And for large screens, this is sometimes really nice, because if you have a wide screen, like my wife, she has a screen at home that's so large, and if she maximizes a window and you don't have an effect like that, she can read like that, and that is not very nice user experience. Okay? Okay, good. CSS, check. Basic routing, check. Now we can go into the next topic, and we can really try to work with our reactive forms. Now comes the most important part, I think, from the lesson today. So please open the people list component here, and maybe you can remember what we already did this year in one exercise. What I did with you is we created a so-called form control. Let's do it like that. Say public name filter equals to new form control, as that one, and give it a default value, and that should be something like this. While you enter this code here, let me repeat what form control is. Form control is the angular representation of a control in a form. This is why it's called form control. It kind of is a bridge between the Angular world and the traditional HTML input field. So form control contains information like the initial value. Does it have validators, for instance, required, minimum length, maximum length? It contains useful information like, is the input currently valid? Is it invalid? And things like that. Got it? So all of these Angular related stuff is stored in the form control. But the form control also knows about the HTML input tag. So this is the bridge between the HTML world and the Angular world. We are going to make heavy use of form control today. This is the simplest version of a form control, just creating the form control, and we are good. Now let's use this form control here in the HTML. Let's simply remove this sample paragraph and replace it with a form. Inside of the form we have a label. This label should say name filter. And here with the label we can say for filter. And then we define the input with the ID filter. This for here, this one, relates to the ID down here. This for is important because if you click with the mouse or with your finger on the label, the corresponding input automatically gets the focus. So it's just a user experience thing. If you forget it, the user experience will be worse. It's not a catastrophe, but you should provide the for here. Input equals filter, that is good. We can say it's a type text because the user should enter text. We can say placeholder, for instance, enter name filter here, something like this, type whatever you want. And now comes the important part, binding form control, and this form control should be our name filter. Oh my god, it doesn't work. Form control is unknown. What did I forget? Import. Thank you. By now, you really remembered this thing. Here in the import, we need the reactive forms module. Today we are just going for reactive forms module. And to be honest, most advanced Angular programmers do not use the stuff that we used last year, the so-called template forms with these banana in a box bindings and so on. Most advanced Angular developers use reactive forms. And this is what I'm going to teach you today. Okay? Nice. Now if you take a look at the website, oh my, yeah, very nice. We have the name filter, we can type in something, but we don't see anything useful here. What I don't like is that the label and the input are kind of glued together. Why? Because we removed all our margins. So let's add a little bit of margin here. Let's go to the CSS here, say, hey, after a label, we want the margin right of, let's say, 5 pixels. Let's see how this looks. Yeah, better, much better. Okay. Well, to be honest, we will have a lot of forms in our application, so I think we can move this label thing to our global styles, because this should really be a rule for every form in our entire application. Do you understand the thinking? If you have something that is applicable to all the code pieces in your application, move it to styled CSS. If you have something which is specific for a certain form, then keep it in the components as CSS file. Okay? Good. Very, very nice. Now let's go to the TypeScript file, and before I describe in details what's going on, just trust me for a moment and type in the code that I'm now going to type. Okay? So please do the following. Let's say we do a public data. Let's not call it data. Let's call it input $. Dollar is important here. And let's make this one this name filter value changes dot pipe tap f console log f, and don't forget to add the import of tap from RxJS. Just trust me for a moment. I will zoom in so you really can read the code nicely. I will describe every single element of this expression in a second. For now, just trust me. Let's build this, this example, and then let's try to understand what it does, okay? Now in HTML, we are going to do the following. We are going to do a binding here and say name filter, oh sorry, how do you call it? Input $, right? Yeah, input $async. This is what we do in HTML. Please add that too. Nice, everybody has entered that. Now let's take a look at our application and watch the console. I will go here in the name filter and I'm going to start typing A. Oh no, not a big surprise here. We see A, B. Okay, here we see A, B, C, D, E, F, G. The important thing, what you see here on the right hand side, is that we have a history of the input in our console. Now what's going on behind the scenes? What we have here with reactive forms is we have this value changes property of our form control. And the important thing of this value changes is that it is, listen closely, an observable. Can anybody remember from any other lectures, maybe you heard about design patterns, about the observable pattern? Can you describe to me what an observable is in your own words? You say it listens for changes. Yeah, who listens for changes? Does the observable listen for changes? Yes?
There is an observer which listens for changes, and
Okay.
the observer will notify us.
Okay, let's keep that one. I think you were speaking about the observer, not the observable. And you described now you said the observable notifies the observer that something has changed. In the context of Angular, we are calling the observer the so-called subscriber. It makes it a little bit simpler to talk about because observable and observer is kind of similar. Let's talk about the observable. It notifies somebody or something that something has changed. And the subscriber, this is the one who is interested in all the changes. So this value changes is, as I said, an observable. So it notifies us whenever something changes. Now, Angular can be a subscriber to an observable by using the async pipe. If we use the async pipe like that, we simply say, hey Angular, please subscribe to this observable and take the result of the notification and write the result on the screen. Do you understand what I mean? With that simple async pipe, we manage to combine the input with this one. Okay? Could you follow so far? Questions so far? Good. Now, what is this here on the right-hand side? What you see here, this output, don't worry, I will recap it again in a second so that you will hear it again, okay? What we see on the right-hand side is this interesting thing, pipe, with the helper function tap. Have you ever heard of wiretapping? Maybe you've heard that in a movie from Hollywood where somebody is wiretapped. Wiretapped means abhören. So I'm listening into someone's conversations on the phone, for instance. Wiretapping. So tapping means I'm taking my ear and I'm listening to what's going on the observable. This is what this tap thing is going to do. So whenever value changes notifies the subscriber that something has changed, the messages, the notification messages, run through this pipe. It's like a pipe where water runs through. Understand what I mean? So we can take a piece of pipe and then another piece of pipe and then another piece of pipe and another piece of pipe. And in our case, we only have a single piece of pipe and it says tap. Tap is just watching what's going on, and every element that flows through the pipe runs through this method. So whenever I type something, every keystroke flows through the pipe, runs into the tap method, and the tap method prints it on the screen, on the console in this case. Clear? Okay, are we good? You might ask yourself, okay, why? What's the advantage? Wait a second. The advantage will come in a second. Now this should be clear. For you, if you would like to follow along, we created here, this line here. This is just setting up a so-called pipeline for the reactive extension, for the name filter, for the form control here on the value changes. And we typed in this one here, where we display the current value of the observable. You know what an observable is, right? Very good. Okay, nice. Any questions so far? Now let me show you some tricks, and here comes in the fascinating part of reactive extensions. There are so many different pipe possibilities. For instance, what I can do is I can use a debounce time pipeline and say debounce time 1000. Please add debounce time 1000 to your pipeline. Can anybody guess what debounce time might do? Do you know what debouncing is? Any tinkerer, any maker who built their own electronic parts? If you have a switch, a mechanical switch, where you press down the switch, something like this, then you will not get a single connection, but when the switch becomes very, very near to the connection point, it sends signals. If you use an electronic device with which you can monitor the signals, you will see that there is a little bit of bouncing going on until the signal becomes stable. So it goes up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Then we are good. If I move it, you can try that at home, maybe with old light switches. If you move the light switch a little bit, then at one point in time, the light starts to flicker. It's not on, it's not off, it continuously goes on, off, on, off, on. And that's a bouncing effect. Can you now guess what debounce time means? Debounce time will not deliver any element through the pipeline until the status has become stable. Let me show you what that means in our application. If I type here A, wait, a second later, after I typed A, I see A. Now if I add B, wait, here, B, a second waiting time. But let me show you what's happening if I type fast. Only when I stop typing for 1 second, the system will deliver the change. And that is so useful for type ahead controls. Do you know that behavior from websites? When you type in, and once you stop typing, the system is, for instance, going to Web API and delivering you some suggestions. And this is exactly what we want to have in Forms. So debounce time is a very important and super useful thing. And do you now understand the pipes? This piping system is really, really powerful because we can configure the behavior of our reactive extensions, of our observables. But what happens if I type pretty fast, but at the end of the day, I do not come up with something different? You see, I type ABC. Okay, we have ABC. Imagine that this will now trigger a web API call saying, hey, give me all the people with ABC in their names. But what if I type A, backspace, A, backspace, A, backspace, A, backspace, A, backspace, A, backspace. Boom, see? I got a second time ABC. Nothing has changed. But I stopped typing for a second, so it goes to the server again and refreshes the list. We don't want that. Understand the problem? Now, how can we solve that? Well, it's really simple, because there is another component here. We can say distinct until changed. This will simply filter out all duplicates. Got it? So see, if I go here and I type ABC, I get ABC. But if I type A backspace, A backspace, A backspace, A backspace, nothing is sent. Because the pipeline component filters out the duplicate. Think about how much work it would take you to implement such a behavior by hand, using set timeout and set interval, and that's really hard stuff. And reactive extensions, RxJS, has dozens, if not hundreds, of diamonds, of treasures in their API. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to do a complete introduction into RxJS. It would take us weeks until we really understand all the nifty details of RxJS. And I've done a lot of work with RxJS, but I also have to often look up some operators if I have to use something which is new to me. We are going to take a look at those pipeline elements that we are going to need for our use cases. But I highly encourage you, if you want to become a professional Angular developer, that you spend some additional time to watch some YouTube videos, conferences, read a little bit in the documentation about RxJS, because it's a treasure trove. It's really a treasure trove, what you have inside of there. Now, you have to understand that the order is super important. What we could, for instance, do is we could add another tab in the pipeline. But this time here, I'm going to say before something like this. And here, oops, sorry, I forgot something. And here I'm going to say after. Think a second about what you think is going to happen. And I'm going to show it to you now. See, I type ABC. Got it? The first tap is taking every single message because it's at the beginning of the pipe. The second tap is at the end of the pipe, after the debounce time and after the distinct values. And therefore, we have 3 befores and 1 after. Got it? And we can do a lot of other things. We can do filtering, we can do mapping, we can do crazy stuff with this. Okay, very good. So, today we have a little bit of a coming and going. We cannot change that, but I will simply recap again what we just did so that, that you can follow along and that you really understand what's going on. I will not record it for a second time, so on the recording we only have it once. Angular is currently seeing a trend that the team that develops Angular thinks about, that Angular applications should also be possible without certain frameworks like Zone.js, maybe at one time RxJS, but I would by far not go so far to say that Angular is abandoning RxJS. By far not. You are going to need RxJS if you build Angular applications, at least today. Nobody knows how Angular will look like in 10 years or so. Did you understand what we have here? Clear so far? Good? Nice. Now, what we need next is we need to integrate the web API call into our pipeline. Because whenever we stop typing, we want to fire up a web API call into the cloud, into our Trippin service. And that is what we are going to do after the break. So first, let's do a break. Welcome back from the break. Let's continue where we stopped. I hope you can remember what we did before the break. We talked about this filter chain, and in fact the tapping, we don't need it. We can remove it here because that was just for demonstration purposes. All that we need is this debounce time and this thing until changed. Now, why are we doing all this stuff? We are doing it because whenever the user stops typing for a certain amount of time, we automatically want to go to the backend system. In our case, we want to go to Trippin, do a web API request there, wait for the result to come back, and then do an ng-for. Okay? Let's try to simulate that. First, before we start simulating that, we have to think about where we should put the function that accesses our backend system. Can we agree that this should be in a separate service? Yes, we can. Yes, we can. This is important. We add data access always in separate services. We shouldn't add the the data access functionality to a component. We have a question.
Yes, why do we have the dollar tag at the
Very good question. Very good question. Why do we have the dollar piece here? It's just a naming convention. Many Angular developers call variables and members that deal with observables with a dollar at the end, so that you see that this is not ready-made data, but an observable that will return the data. That's just a naming convention. If you dislike the dollar, leave it out. We don't need it. It's just a naming convention. Okay? Very good question. Thank you for asking this. Good. So let's create a service. npx ng generate service, and I will call it simply Trippin. That will end up with a Trippin service. Okay, let's do that. Trippin should be here within a second. Here is our Trippin service. Now in this Trippin service, we want to have a function, public, get people. It receives a name filter, optionally, which is a string. And it will return What is it going to return? It's going to return an observable. Yeah, we know that it will going to return an observable, but an observable of what? Well, we don't know it yet. So let's write any for the moment, and let's just say it will be an array, but we don't really know what will be inside the array. We will talk about that in this lesson, okay? So let's simply add observable from RxJS, and I think that is good. Now here we will access the Trippin OData web API later, not now. For now, we can do something which is pretty simple. There is a function from RxJS which says from. Okay? And this from simply takes any variable or literal and it simply simulates an observable that will return later on what we enter here. For instance, we can simply say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We return here an array. Oh, I made a mistake. Sorry, we have to use of, not for. I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry. I screwed up because from would take the elements, but we want to return the entire array in one step. Sorry for simulation, we need the off here. Okay? This simply says I'm simulating an observable that in real life maybe will take a while until it receives the array because it will access the web API. But for now, I'm just simulating it and I will simply return these numbers in an array. Understand what I mean? It's not really an observable. There is nothing to observe here. It's immediately ready, but it's okay to simulate what's going to happen later on. Got it? Okay, nice. So let's try exactly that method in our pipeline. First, we need to import the Trippin service here in our component. Please do so. This should be the Trippin service. Here it is. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so stupid. I have to. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I screwed up. No, we do not have to import. I have to think before I talk. I'm sorry. We already have the injectable here on top. No need to import services. I told you something wrong. We already covered that. My mistake. I apologize. Okay? No need to import services. Only need to import components. No need to import services. What we need to do is we need to add a constructor to our people list component. Let's do that. Let's say we have a constructor and this constructor has a private Trippin service. That looks much better now. We have to import, how did I call it? Yeah, the Trippin service. Did I mistype here? I spelled it wrong here. I'm sorry. I called it Tippin service. So I will rename the file and I will rename this class. Of course, it should be Trippin service. And now, if I add Trippin service, it's found. Nice. I like that. So here you see we have the Trippin service. Now the question is, what can we do in our pipeline to access the API? And this will hopefully blow your mind. This is, I always call it Harry Potter programming. A little bit of fairy dust and it just works. Follow along. SwitchMap. Name. Get people name. SwitchMap. Uppercase M. Is available in RxJS. And here the name might be empty, so we replace an empty undefined name with an empty string. And believe it or not, that's it. I'm going to show you in a second what's really going on here behind the scenes. But for now, we simply accept that there is something like a switch map. Now, what happened with our application? Here is the application. If I enter something, ABC, see? It works. Magically, we type in ABC and we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So our simulation really works. This switchMap thing takes the observable of string and turns it into an observable of result array. We can even, just to demonstrate what we are having here, we can even go in our people list component and embed that in an ngFor. Let me show you what I mean. I can simply say, give me an unordered list, just for demonstration purposes. Then give me a list item here, and I say ngFor equals to let item of data dollar, something like this, async, that's the important part here, and then just use the item here. And obviously we have to check with an ngIf if the data dollar is set. Otherwise we shouldn't do that. How did I call it? Input dollar. I'm sorry, input dollar. It's no longer input, we should rename it. It was input a minute ago. The important thing is that I can now iterate over the result of our web API. See, ABC, boom. That is awesome. Can you remember how much code we had to write last year with this subscribe stuff and all this thing? We don't need it anymore. It simply works. Let me describe it again. Okay, let me draw again my beautiful, picture that I had before. We are starting with an observable of string. This is our input field. Now let me draw again. This is my water tap here. This one and this one. Okay. Now here we have water flowing out of our pipe here. Remember, the observable string is the thing that the user types in. And here we have our different pipeline elements. The debounce time, the distinct until changed, and now comes in this, let's use a different color, switchMap. And you know what this switchMap does? This switchMap takes whatever it gets. It gets the observable of string, and then it turns this thing into an observable of some kind of array. And this turning the observable of string to turning into an observable of array happens with exactly that rule here. It calls the API. So whenever the user types in something, we have an element flowing here, triggering this function. This function will call the web API in the server, pass in the message that we got, and that will end up with an array of customer, people, trips, whatever you want. Understood? That's a beautiful design, right? I mean, take a look at this code. We have so much functionality now. This debouncing and all this stuff. Auto-refreshing of the web page. It works like a charm. Are we good? Questions? Well, there is something that I haven't told you yet. But it's so awesome. I think I'm sounding like a TV salesman today, right? I want to sell you. I don't want to sell you anything. I'm really just fascinated of this technology. I really like this technology. This switch map, there is a reason why it's called switch. It switches from one observable to the other, but it additionally does something else. Let me draw a diagram again. Imagine the following happens. The user has his keyboard, okay? This is a keyboard. I'm drawing a keyboard now. This does not look like a keyboard, but I think you get the idea, right? I think you get the idea. This is now a keyboard, a very strange keyboard, granted, but it's a keyboard. Now, the user types in a letter. For instance, the letter A. This letter A becomes part of our observable of string and will be delivered to our switchMap. So this will go into the switchMap. Okay, this will be the switchMap. Now the switchMap goes to the server. Here we have our server. The switchMap goes to the server and says, hey server, please give me a list of people. Unfortunately, this server is really, really slow. So it takes, let's assume, 10 seconds until it can return a list of people. So, a list of persons. The user presses A, and it takes, and takes, and takes, and takes, and then the list of persons appear. Good so far? Now, what happens if while the user is waiting, he remembers, oh, I don't want to look for A, but I want to look for AB. So what the user does, the user is typing a B here additionally. Now we have a problem, because this AB goes to the switchMap, and the switchMap says, I'm still busy. I'm still busy fetching the data for filter criteria A. Understand what I mean? What do you think switchMap will do? Will it throw an error? Will it terminate your application? Somehow, you are right. What switchMap does, switchMap will cancel the existing observable. It will really tell the browser, hey browser, I'm no longer interested in this web API call. So it will cancel the existing web API call and start a new web API call. By canceling the web API call, the server, if the server is smart, it can recognize, oh, the user is no longer interested in this web API call. Imagine that the server is doing really heavy computation. It can stop doing this computation, and that is very good for the overall system performance. And what did we have to code to get this behavior? Nothing. It's just baked into switchMap. Isn't that awesome? That is exactly what we want to have. Yeah? We can try that later on. Unfortunately, the Trippin API is rather fast, so it will be pretty hard to see a cancelled web request, but maybe we can do it. Maybe we can limit the bandwidth of Chrome in the developer tools, and then we can try to force it to really cancel a web API request. Did you get the idea? So switchMap is canceling the inner observable, and that is an important one. Yes, there is much more than switchMap. There is a merge map and many other functions. Read the documentation if you're interested in. It's not that simple. Okay, good. This is what I wanted to tell you about switchMap. Now, let's make it real. Let's access the API for our Trippin service. Let's go to the Trippin service here. And in the Trippin service, we are going to implement a little bit of code. Remember, in the homework, I told you what this OData stuff is all about. Let's quickly repeat that. This was, let me zoom in a little bit, this was a sample request from OData. OData is a standard which is rather old, but old as in good and established. Yes, it's not the most sexy standard that cool kids on the block are currently using. I agree. You know who uses OData heavily? Boring companies like SAP and Microsoft. If you access any Microsoft APIs, you often will see things like that, things like OData. If you access SAP, you will often see things like OData. Yes, it's boring, but yes, it's also relevant. Is it difficult to build your own OData services? No. If you use ASP.NET Core, building an OData service is nearly a piece of cake. It's a few lines of code and you have your own OData service. It's really not difficult, and if you want, I can show you. At the end of the day, the idea of OData is that the client, in our case the Angular client, can decide, for instance, which field the client is interested in. imagine that this user or people entity, as we can see it here, contains 200 fields. A lot of data. But you're only interested in 5 fields. Without OData, you always fetch the entire record. You always say, give me data about the person 1, 2, 3, 4. And you get 200 fields transferred over the network to your client, and then you're only interested in 5. This is what OData is all about. It puts the client in charge. The client becomes a supercharged client because the client can simply express what it wants to have. It can choose the result columns. It can choose the filter criteria. It can choose the ordering, joins, and so on. It's like SQL, structured query language, but through the... I'm sorry, I forgot to turn. But through the URL. Got it? Okay, very good. And this web API is what we are going to access now. Let's try that. First, we need to have this, this setting here where we have the base URL. I'm not sure if you can remember how we did this configuration stuff last year. I will show it to you again because now we are in standalone components. Please open your app config.ts. Here we are. And in the app config.ts, we are going to export a const, let's say Trippin base URL. And in this Trippin base URL, we are going to use a new injection token, this one. And it would be of type string, and let's call it Trippin base URL. I will write the lines of code, and maybe you can then remember what we did last year. Here we simply said provide Trippin, provide, this is what I wanted, Trippin base URL, use value, and here we use the value, from our URL here, this one. This is it. The only thing that we need should be here. And it should be like this. Yes, sorry, I've placed the brackets on the wrong thing here. It should be on the same level as provide router. Okay, and please replace the key here. Of course, I told you how to get to the key. The key you can get your own key by navigating to this URL that you see up here and simply copying the key out of the URL. So here you have your key. The important thing is that in practice, a lot of Angular non-trivial Angular applications have a lot of settings, configuration values. And it's a good style to keep all the configuration values within a single file. And this file is called app.config.ts. It's the config file. Understood? And it's using dependency injection. I don't want to go into every single detail why we need an injection token. Simply do it like that. It works. It works fine if you want to dive very deep, read the documentation. We are just saying, hey, if anybody needs this base URL, they can simply ask for the injection of this constant here. You will see it in a second, okay? So I highly recommend that you use this way of setting. If you don't do that in an exam, for instance, well, I will maybe reduce your points by 0.5 or something like this. It's a minor mistake. It's not super critical, but it would be nice if you do it. Because then, in our service, we can easily write the constructor here and say, hey, please inject the Trippin base URL in my private base URL of type string. Understood? So we do not have all the settings, the URLs and so on distributed across our entire application, but we really have it nicely put together in a single file, app.config.ts, and wherever we need a configuration value, we simply say inject it. Got it? There are other ways to achieve that, but this is one way that I definitely want to show you because it's very common. Let me show it to you again. Here, this is the definition of the injection, and this is the injection itself. Any questions about that? Very good. Now we have the URL. And the next thing that we need is we need to access the HTTP client. Can you remember it from last year? Now we have a little bit of a problem. Last year we added the HTTP client module. We added it in the module, but we have no module anymore. So let me show you how you can get the HTTP client module in a standalone application. You go again into app config and you simply say import providers from HTTP client module. Don't forget to import, to import the HTTP client module. It should be here. So this is what you should know. Before I answer your question, let me make a comment here. In your exams in this year, you can of course use all the material, so you do not need to know this by heart. You can simply look it up. You just have to know where to find it. That's all that's necessary. For the Matura, things like that will probably be already in your existing starter code. Okay? In the Matura, it will be about your algorithmic skills, about your understanding of programming concepts like reactive forms, data binding, and so on. But such things, such configuration things, which you typically look up in practice, we do not require you to know that by heart. Okay, that's not necessary. Good? Okay, so that's a very good suggestion. You can do both. Both will work. Provide HTTP client, import providers from HTTP client module, whatever you prefer. Okay? Good solutions. Both solutions are perfectly fine. We good? Any problems? Okay, problem solved. So let's continue with our service now that we have this provide HTTP client or the inject. We can get the HTTP client here. We can simply say private HTTP client, and this will be the HTTP client. Okay, now we have in our service the HTTP client, and we can access this HTTP client. Let's implement our getPeople function. It's not very complicated. First, let's write the method with which we can really access the underlying service. That would be a return this .http client. We want to do a get request here. We don't know the type yet, so let's just say here that is an any array. We are going to talk about the type in a second. And then we need the URL. This would be the $this. Okay, it suggests a lot of stuff. Let's do this stuff here. People, exactly. That looks good. And then, nothing then, that's done. That's all we need, right? Well, no, because we don't do a name filter yet. So that is something that we definitely need to add. But in general, this is what we do. Please note that in contrast to last year, we do not have a .subscribe here. This is not present. We do not subscribe to the observable. We return the observable itself. And the caller, in this case, this will be the people list component. This caller will then do the subscribe, but the subscribe is also not done here. The subscribe is done here through the async pipe. So we are not manually subscribing. We are delegating the subscribing, the management of the subscription to Angular by using the async pipe. Got it? Makes sense? Okay, let's check if it really works. If we go into the browser, well, you can guess that it probably will not work currently, and that's by design. If I type in an A here, let's see what's going to happen. See? ng4 only supports binding to iterables, but this type is kind of an object. Let's take a look at what came back from the web API. Let's take a look at the response, okay? Let's take a look at how OData works. OData works in a way that on top level it returns an object, and inside of this object we have a value array. See? This is how OData getting works. Just accept it. I didn't invent it. It's part of the standard. This is how OData works. So if we try here to directly ng4 over input $, we have a problem. Because this is an object and not an array. What's missing? Who can help? What should I write? What I could do is I could simply do it something like this and say value, right? Okay, this value thing can be null. Okay, we can maybe fix that one. Let's simply say question mark, or here do an exclamation, something like, sorry, bless you. We still have a problem here. This value thing is still null. It doesn't work really nicely, does it? We have a problem because if we take a look at the data here and the types here, especially here in our Trippin service, what do we return here? You see it? Is that correct? Why is it not correct? Why are you shaking your head? Exactly, but it returns what? An object. And what's inside of this object? No. A property, values, and that is of type array. Yes, exactly. So what we can do, let me show you how powerful TypeScript is. We can simply say the observable is of an object type that contains a value, and the value is the any array. Isn't that beautiful? So here again, it's an object with a value, and the value is an any array. Got it? That's really nice, isn't it? In other programming languages, you need for something, you need to define a class or an interface or whatever. Here we can simply say, hey, this type is an object and it contains a value. Do you understand what I mean? Does that make sense? Let me show you, to make it very, very clear, how other languages would solve this problem. They would probably say something like export into, you do not need to type along. I'm just demonstrating how other programming languages are. We could say this is something like an OData response, something like this. Here we could say value is an any array, and then we can use here the OData response, and then we can use here the OData response. Got it? But what I wanted to demonstrate to you is that TypeScript is way more intelligent. You can declare this as an inline type. You see? This is a type declaration inside of your code without giving it a name. And that is very unique about TypeScript. If you don't like that, hey, define the interface. I'm fine with that. It works like a charm, but you don't need to. That is what I wanted to show you. And you see this syntax pretty frequently in TypeScript. So as more advanced TypeScript developers, you should at least be able to read this syntax. Let me repeat it again. It's like an anonymous declaration of a type interface or type. Directly, inline. Good. C# doesn't know about that. In C# you cannot do something like this. Okay? Nice. Now decide on your own whether you want to have this one or whether you want to have this one. Whoops. Reformatted it. Oops. Yeah, everything's fine. Now let's go back to the HTML, and now we see that we have a little bit of a problem here, because it now already in the code tells us, hey Rani, you cannot ng4 over the object that came back from the observable, because that is not an array. This doesn't work like that. So what we can do is we can say dot value. See that one? Question mark simply means if it's null, don't do anything. Got it? Okay, so let's give it a try. Let's type A. Let's see what's going to happen. People was sent. That is good, but we don't see any result here. Okay, that's not so good. But you should now see, if you type here, BC, you should now see web requests going over the network. Please try that. You will probably not see a response here, but you will see the web requests going over the wire. Now I get a response. The problem was, I see the network request. The problem why I didn't see any response was my Angular compiler crashed. I had to restart npm start. Okay, everything else was okay. You see, we have an object. Hey, that's awesome. Let's display something from this object. Maybe we will simply say .username. What do you say? And let's see here, AB. Oh my God, we have usernames. It works perfectly fine, like a charm. You know what I dislike in this solution? I can reload the page and I don't get a list of all the people. I first have to enter something. If I want to have all the people, I have to type in something and remove it again, and then I get a refresh. You know how we can solve that? RxJS. The answer to all questions is not 42. The answer to all questions is RxJS. We can simply extend our pipeline by saying starts with empty filter. And that will make sure that one message flows through our pipeline immediately when we start the app. And see, I don't need to do anything. We get a list of people and it works like a charm. Try it and tell me if it works. I will show you the code. Here is the code. This is the starts with. And let me show you the HTML. Let's put it that way so you can try it and you can tell me whether you understand the code and whether it works. Okay, very nice. It works on all the workstations as expected. Now we are going to copy a little bit of code because this doesn't make a lot of sense by typing it in. I will share a link with you in a second. I've prepared that for you, so we do not need to spend too much time writing boring code. This is permalink, and I will copy it to Discord. So you see, I just copied you the link to this line of code, and you can simply copy the implementation up until here. Do not copy this catch arrow thing here. Do not copy the catch arrow. This is something that is more advanced. We'll see whether we can cover it today. Okay? And then we can go into the Trippin service and replace our implementation with exactly that code. Now we need a bunch of imports. Shouldn't be a problem. And here we don't have person yet. That will be any, and that's it. The reason why I told you to copy it in is because that is a lot of text stuff. I already gave you that in the request file, and this is just adding the filter clause, the select clause, and the order by clause. Okay? So this is why I simply gave you this stuff. It's simply string concatenation. It's boring. We do not need to spend time on it. Before we go into the break, please try it again. open the app. If you type in ABC, the result should be empty. If you type in RUS, you should get Russell White, and that is exactly what we want. And if you take a look at the request, you will see that the filter was injected correctly into the $filter clause. This is the status that we should have at this point in our exercise. I will leave it on the screen for a second, and with that, we go into the second break. Welcome back from after the break. Let's get started again. Before the break, we managed to display a list of records. As you can see, it works perfectly fine. I can type in some filter values and it works. I promised you that we are going to try whether we can provoke a cancellation through the switchMap. What I can do is I can, as you can see here, turn on throttling, which limits the amount of data which goes through a network interface. I will now say slow 3G, just to make it clear, and I will also go to my code. You do not need to follow along. I'm just doing it here for demo purposes. I will debounce time with 1 millisecond, okay? That's not really practical, but maybe I can show you what's going on. So let's wait. You see it's loading way, way slower. You see the loading times are very, very long. Waiting, waiting. Oh, maybe I overdid it with slow 3G. Let's do fast 3G because otherwise we will be here until tomorrow. Okay, maybe let's do no throttling. Okay, and now turn on slow 3G. Hopefully it works now better. Now let me type key E. See? This is exactly what I wanted to show you. This is the magic of switchMap, canceling the old HTTP request and then doing a new one. See? That is exactly what I was telling you about before. Again, think of how much work it would have taken you to implement a solution like that. It's simply a lot of work. Good? Yep. Nice. I like that we managed to do that. I will say 1000 again with debounce time. This is, I think, what we had before, so we are good. Our people list component is already pretty nice. Yes, we have to design it so that we have a CSS grid. That's fine, that's all okay, but that is nothing new. We already discussed CSS grids in the previous lectures, so I do not want to focus on that one. I want to focus on something else which is more important because it's new. Let me show you, if we Google here for Trippin and OData, we will find here the URL, and if I go to that one, Trippin, I will see something which is rather interesting. You see, this is this services data, OData, blah, 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 Trippin service, blah, blah, blah. But the important thing is, what's that? See that one? Here we have people. If I scroll down, people, we have photos, we have airports, we have nearest airports, we have airlines. And if we take a look at what's going on with our web requests here, if we take a look at the response, you will see that the very first response contains an additional thing that is called OData context. Now, what's going to happen if we simply take this metadata stuff here and execute that one? Let's see oh, interesting, right? We get a description what a person is. We see that there is a username, a first name, a last name, a middle name, a gender, an age, an email address, and so on. We see that here we have a so-called navigation properties so that we can navigate from people to trips and many other things. This is what we call metadata. Are you all familiar with the term metadata? You definitely have learned that in your HTML career, but maybe you forgot about it. Can anybody tell me what metadata is all about? Okay, your suggestion is metadata is data that describes real data. Well, metadata is also real data. But in a way, you are correct. Metadata is data about data. That means metadata does not describe a concrete person. So it's not the person John Doe, but metadata is describing what a person is characterized of. Each person has a first name, has a middle name, has a last name, has an age, has a gender, and so on. This is metadata. So what you see here is that the OData service provides metadata. Last year, you have learned from me about another metadata standard for APIs. Can you remember? Can anybody remember the name? Think of ASP.NET Core. We used metadata there. Swagger, Open API Specification, OAS, right? That's another form of metadata. And what we see here is the OData version of metadata. Yes, OData has metadata. Open API Specification, also known as Swagger, is also metadata. And there are multiple metadata standards out there. So the important thing is that our server, the Trippin server, is not just capable of delivering data, list of people, but it's also capable of answering to the question, what kind of data can you provide and how is it structured? Got it? Now, what do we have to do to get rid of this ugly any here? We will get back a person. Now what we could do is we could simply take a look at this metadata, exactly that, what you see here, and translate this metadata into a TypeScript type, right? We could say we have a TypeScript type which is called person. And the first property is the username and it is a string. And the next property is the first name, which is a string, and so on. And we can do the same with trips. If I scroll down a little bit, we should see here. We should see the entity type trip. See? We see that the trip has an ID, has a share ID, has a start set, which is a date time. I think you got the point so far, right? Wouldn't that be boring? Wouldn't that be, I mean, last year we did exactly that. We sat down and manually created interfaces or types for each and every entity that we have on the server. But this year, we are already professionals. So what we want to do, and that's a general topic, you will find that very frequently in the wild outside. You have a server, this one, the server, it offers some kind of API, and this server offers on the one hand side data, and on the other hand side it offers metadata. It doesn't matter whether you use OData, or whether you use Swagger, or whether you use GraphQL. It's a very strange sound. Okay, thank you. It doesn't matter which API standard you use. There is always the fact that you have metadata. And the important thing is that from this metadata, you can use tools, special tools, and I will show you one example to generate TypeScript from this metadata. So you do not have to type it in yourself. Got it? That helps, especially when you have complex data models. In our sandbox experiments, we typically have 1, 2, 3 tables with, I don't know, 5 to 10 properties. But you know what? In practice, I have worked with databases with tens of thousands of tables. I have seen database tables with hundreds of fields. And it's not a lot of fun if you have 5,000 tables in your database and each table has on average 50 properties to type in the TypeScript code yourself. It's not professional. It's a waste of time. We don't want to do that. I will demonstrate you in this course, not today, but generally in this course, how to generate TypeScript from OData and how to generate TypeScript from Swagger. You will learn both. This example uses an OData service, so we will start with OData. Important note, I do not expect you to do that at the final exam, at the Matura. Don't worry, the steps that we do now are for your general education. It is not relevant for the Matura. At the Matura, you will probably have these types ready-made for you. We have too little time at the Matura to ask you to do all these steps. It's simply not enough time. So don't worry, not relevant for the Matura. Relevant for the exam? Maybe. I don't know yet. Okay, let me show you how we can do that. First, we need to install a tool. There is a tool which is called OData to TypeScript. It's written like that. Let me show you. Where is my mouse? Mouse. Here's my mouse. It's called OData to TypeScript. And it does exactly what the name suggests. It converts OData metadata to TypeScript classes. This is what we are going to do. So let's spin up terminal. Here it is. And let's install this tool. Let's install it, and that would be an npm install -d for development dependency, and it's called @odata2ts/odata2ts. It should be installed within a few seconds. It's not a large tool. Once you install this tool, oh sorry, I was too fast here. This is the command, okay? Once you install the tool, you can check your package.json, and the package.json should now contain an entry here. Under dev dependencies here, you should now see this tool, OData to TypeScript. I give you a second to catch up and to install this tool in your application. So this is exactly what we need, this OData config ts solution. In the solution folder, in the Trippin example here, copy this code, and as I said, I will give you this code now in Discord. The link to this code is now in Discord, and please call this file odata2ts.config.ts, and it is in the root folder of your application. Okay, so odata2ts.config.ts, and there you simply paste in the content of the file that I just told you. It's a very simple configuration file. It simply says, this is the OData service I want to access, and please write all the necessary code that I want in this source app modals directory. We want to have TypeScript, as you can see it here. It's a very simple configuration file, nothing complicated. Once you have that, you can run npx odata2ts. So we execute the tool. Let's see what's going to happen. Running. And if we take a look, we now have a subfolder which is called modals. And inside of this subfolder, you see here, we have a person with username and so on. We have, what else do we have? We have an airline, you see, with a lot of code. So all this code was now generated for us. All these interfaces, we do not need to generate them by hand. And that is super useful, right? Of course we could have written that by hand, but it's not very funny to do that. So with this tool, it's really simple to generate the necessary TypeScript code that we can now use throughout our application. And as I told you, in the upcoming weeks, I will also show you how you can do something similar with Swagger metadata. Yeah? Questions? Okay, important questions answered, hopefully. Now we can easily enhance our code. Because what we can now do is we can, for instance, here with the HTTP client, you see that one, we can change that from any to person, because now we have a person from our trip model. Got it? It's no longer any, it's really now a person. And we can also enhance our interface. If you went for the interface, we can make it generic here and simply say T here, and then here we can say OData response of person. Got it? Now we have types. We really have type checking, and that's the important one. And with Angular, this works like a charm, because if I go now to the HTML page here, and if I press item dot, see? Isn't that beautiful? This comes from OData metadata. Now I do not need to remember all the fields in my mind. I need to know them by heart. That's no longer necessary. I get compile time checking, and if I mistype, I get a compiler error, not a runtime error. Please try that. Username. I will just for demonstration purposes change that one to last name. And if I go here, let's see, type something in. Yeah, we already see it. It works perfectly fine. Somewhere we should see our friend, the Russell White. Yes, thank you. I forgot his name. Please try it. Very nice. It works on all machines. We solved all the problems. So now I think we can beautify our output, right? And in this lecture, I do not want to type all the necessary code together with you, because we already practiced setting up the CSS grid. I have prepared a solution for you, so we will simply copy the HTML, the necessary HTML part, and we will also copy the necessary CSS part, and I will walk you through the code so you understand it. But we will not take the time to type every single line, because that is not the focus of today. It's just a quick repetition of CSS grids. So what you should do is you should go into the GitHub repository, and there in the solution folder, you go into source, you go into app, you go into people list, and there first let's start with the HTML. The form, we already did it. We do not need to copy it. But here you copy everything from line 8 down to line 31. We will delete some lines of code because we will probably not have enough time today to do error handling. So we will remove the error handling parts. But still, it is useful to copy all these things. So let's go here to the people list HTML and remove our UL with exactly the code that I just told you. And then we'll rework it. First, the people are not in data $, but they are in input $, in our case. Error handling stuff here on the right hand side, please just remove it. We don't need it. Error handling stuff here, please just remove it. The router link, which will be the link to the other route, we don't have it yet, please remove it. Error handling here, please remove it. Error handling here, please remove it. And now I'll keep it on the screen so you can catch up. That should be code that compiles. It doesn't look beautiful because we need some SCSS, but this is essentially what we, that's the structure that we are going to need. I will walk you through every single line in a second. But first, try to make your code compile again. Okay, it works on all machines, at least it compiles on all machines. Now let me walk you through this code. Let's go through it line by line. First, let's take a look at the first line. There is a neat trick in this line which we haven't done before at all. Can you tell me, can you remember what ngIf does? Everybody should know that. That's a rhetorical question because I demand that everybody knows that. It's a conditional display of some content in the HTML file. But you know what? This ngIf is not here for conditional display. It contains an object. Here you see the object. So it will always be true. So why do we have an ngIf which is always true? And the reason is this one. So again, here, this ngIf is not really a condition. Here, this as is the important. The as is just an alias that saves us a lot of writing. Because this expression here, input $pipe async, is rather complicated to write and rather complicated to read. Instead, we can give this a name, call it people. And then throughout the rest of our template, we can always just refer to this one as vm.people. VM is just a name, call it Hansi or Grady, I really don't care. VM is just a name. This is a nice little trick, right? Otherwise, we would have to write input async, and you know what's worse? If we have multiple times input $pipe async, Angular would trigger multiple HTTP requests to the backend, and we don't want that. So we have a single time this async pipe, it subscribes a single time, it sends a single request, and we are good. This is a trick, and I want you to remember this trick. You see it very frequently when you read professional Angular code. Okay, that was the first line. Let's take a look at the second line. Here we really have an ngIf. We only display this part if people is not empty. So people must contain something. So the pipeline here must be finished. The request must be finished. Otherwise, we do not want to display the result, right? Makes sense. But the interesting thing is that for the first time in our Angular career, I think we didn't do that last time, we have an ngIf with an else clause. We haven't seen that last year, but now we have it. What we can do in Angular, we can say if people were already read from the server, then display the result. Otherwise, display that template which has the identifier loading. So this will automatically switch between the loading indicator and the result, depending on whether the result was completed already. Got it? If else in Angular, something new. Now the content is really simple. It's just a header, as you can see it here. And then we have a result, which is built with an ng4. However, we have something here which is a little bit new. It's not fully new. I discussed it with you last time already. It's the ng container. Can anybody remember what the ng container was all about? We had it last time. Yeah, you have an idea?
It's just a container so we can run ng4 on the virtual element.
Yeah.
We don't have to call the ng4 multiple times.
Yeah.
Because we don't need a div for the username.
And what is the important difference between the ng container and, for instance, a div? I could replace the ng container with a div. Yes?
Library.
No. Yeah.
There won't be any div for a container.
There won't be any what? There won't be any, try to find the right technical term.
Like for ng container.
There won't be any element in the DOM representing the ng container. If we add a div here, the div will be visible in the HTML, in the browser's DOM, document object model, in HTML if you want. But if you write an ng container, the ng container is not visible in the resulting DOM. Got it? That was the big difference here. Yeah, and I think I do not need to describe ng4. We all know what ng4 does, so that is fine. Good. Very good. Question?
Another question, what
Yeah.
is ng template?
ng template. Oh, that's just an Angular construct with which you can define, as the name suggests, a template that you can reference from other places. It's just a template which can be rendered on a different location. And this is what this else is looking for. So here in this else, you see the identifier loading, and this loading is simply referencing the ng template. Templates are used for various purposes. Templates are used for this if-else. Templates are, for instance, used in more complicated grid applications where you say, I specify a template for a number, I specify a template for the customer number, I specify a template for a credit card number, I specify a template for editing a credit card number. So you can simply define templates, in German Muster, and then in the Angular app you can refer to this template and apply it in multiple places. We are not going to implement our own components using templates, but templates are simply what the name suggests. They are a template which can be used on another location. Is that okay? Just for a rough rest, read the docs. Nice. Now we need to describe and need to format all this stuff. As you can see here in the class, in the resulting grid, I specified here a class called result grid. And this result grid is now the heart of the CSS specification. And I ask you to open the style CSS of my sample solution. And here you have the result grid. You know what? I will copy a permalink into your Discord. You have the link in your Discord, and we just copy everything down to the last line and put it here in our styles as CSS. And again, I will walk you through the relevant code. Let's put the style CSS and the people list HTML side by side so we see what's going to happen. Now in general, this whole thing is... Did I already tell you that my escape key broke on my laptop? The keyboard is already shipped to me from the US, but it takes a while until it reaches me, will reach me. So this is the result grid. Now in the result grid, we have 5 columns. And this is why I use the repeat 5-1-FR here. That means 5 times 1 fraction. So we have 5 columns and every column has the same width. This is what we define here. And if you count it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Check. Header, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Check. Works perfect. Now, what else do we have? A little bit of padding, but I will not go into details about padding. The important thing is the header here, this header, and this is exactly that header. And here I simply say, hey, header, please give me a light gray background and display the font in bold. Got it? But there is a secret here, and it's called display contents. And I will tell you in a second what this is. This is pure magic. First, let's take a look whether it works. Oh, isn't that beautiful? Hey, we are web designers, aren't we? I think we are. And if we look for Russell, do we find Russell? Hey, Russell. Here is Russell. Yes, it works. Okay, maybe we should add a little bit of margin here, but in general, our CSS grid works really nice. And if I make the screen state a little bit smaller, you see the columns all align each other properly with the 1 fraction. I think you got the idea, right? Works really nice, does it? Yep. I like that. So here you see it. Now, what is this display contents all about? And that's a CSS trick that you should remember. Now, if I remove this one, this display contents, the whole CSS grid will be completely ruined. See? Why? Can anybody tell me why this one line, commenting out this one line, ruins the entire CSS grid? I told it to you last time. Okay, let me tell you the secret behind this thing. Let's remember how this CSS grid works. Here we specify that we have 5 columns. So we build a grid that looks something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns. That is good. Now, how can we fill this grid? I told you last time that the algorithm works like this. It simply looks at all the children of this container and takes the first 5 elements and fills up the first row. That is the first row. Row, row, row. And when it finds the 6th children, it automatically starts in the next row. Row, 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 row. When it finds the 11th children, it automatically goes into the next row. Do I need to continue? I think you understand what I mean. So again, I ask you again, why does this one ruin the entire CSS grid? Yes? Exactly, you spotted it correctly. The diff in line 10 is our problem, because that counts as a single child. Got it? And by adding this nice little CSS trick, display contents, we are telling this div, hey div, you do not really exist. You do not really exist. Go away. Make your children the main part. Okay? It simply says, take these children here, the content of this element, and move them up one layer in the DOM hierarchy for CSS Grid. Got it? And this is exactly what this display contents is all about. That's a really nice trick, isn't it? Yes? Could we use an ng container? Well, no, because we need to apply a class. And we only can apply a class to a DOM node. But if we use the ng container, there is no node. What we could have done is we could have removed, please do not follow along, this one. We could have removed this one, and I could have added here class equals header. I could have done it like that, but that's ugly. It's possible, but it's not beautiful. Yeah, it works. But this is not what I want, because I want you to show, I want to show you, now I got it correctly, some tricks. And this is a really nice trick that you see pretty often. Do you see what I'm doing here? Last year, we really scratched the surface on CSS, only a little bit. And this year, I show you more tricks. People heavily underestimate what you can do with CSS. I see so many people who think that web development is only about TypeScript, and my HTML is a trivial thing, really, and CSS, that's for web designers. No, CSS is powerful. You can do a lot of things. Compare that to your styling capabilities in other programming languages, to Java or WPF or something like this. Not comparable. Compare that to Flutter. Any Flutter developers in the room? How many curly braces have you written in your life? I personally prefer CSS, but there are many people who hate CSS because sometimes it's a little bit tricky to get right. And it's very handy if you have a colleague who has a lot of experience in CSS. If you don't have such a colleague, it's a good idea to write questions in Stack Overflow. Okay, good. Our template works nicely. I like what I see. Filtering works. Do you have any complaints about this UI? Is it good? Fine? Yep. Question? Yes, please. Let me repeat that answer on the video so you have it. The question was, why do we have a horizontal scroll bar? We had a horizontal scroll bar here, and the answer is because we were missing the box sizing, which makes sure that the width 100% is calculated correctly. Good, together we solved this question. Very good. We have a really nice status here at the end of the 3rd hour. We have 1 hour left. And in this remaining 1 hour, we are going to do the navigation between the people list and the trips. But for now, let's have a short break. Welcome back from the break. Let's start with the last hour of today's lecture. We had a nice status of our app here. Looks nice. Okay, I hate that we don't have a margin here. I simply can't live with that. We have to fix that. What should we do? I think we can simply add here a margin top, maybe 10 pixels or something like this. Let's see. Yeah, much better. Thank you. Now I can sleep. Otherwise it would have haunted me in my sleep. So yeah, now I'm fine. The next thing that I would like to do is something that we did already last year, but this is a nice repetition because you will definitely need it in your Matura, in your final exam, and there are news. What I want to have is I want to make the username column a link. So I can click on this link and then I will find myself in the trip list component that displays a list of the trips of the given person. Okay, this is our goal. Now the first thing is very simple. Make this a link. I guess that you can remember how we did that last year. If not, let me remind you. You go to your people list component and then you can simply make this one a hyperlink using an anchor tag, of course, and then we do not... Question?
What if I want the whole row to be a link? Can I just...
You want the whole row to be a link? You want... I'm not sure if that would be a nice user experience. A possibility would be to add a 6th column where we have a button or something like this. Yes, you could do that. The entire row, you would have to do a little bit of magic here. Yeah, it would be possible, but I don't want to get into it. I hope you understand. Okay, here we use a router link. Can you remember the router link stuff? Okay, the router link should be a binding here. And here I would say, what was the name of the route here? We said people. Now we could say, hey, navigate to people / and then we can add the username here. So this is a string constant and we simply append the p.username. And maybe add, I don't know, something like trips at the end. Why not? Okay, we have a problem. The system tells me that router link is not known. What am I missing? Yes, exactly. We go into the TypeScript code and again we have a missing import. In this case, we simply import the router module because we do something with routing, right? And then this router link works perfectly fine. So if I go to my website, this is now a link. And if you take a close look here at the bottom, you will see that the link is built correctly. I will show you the code. You can type in the code. Yes, we have a question. Thank you for pointing that out. We simply remove the people stuff here and start immediately with username because otherwise we would end up with people / people and that is ugly. And now if we zoom in a little bit, you see now it looks good. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, very nice. So let's add a component which can display a list of trips and then let's add a route. Go into the terminal, npx ng generate component. Let's call it trip list. npx ng generate component trip list. That gives us the trip list here. And now we can specify the route. The route is a simple one. We simply say path. And here we say people / username / trips. And that should bring us to the component trip list component. Please note that the username has this colon in front of it. That means that this part of the URL is a placeholder. It's a parameter inside the path. That means that we do not literally mean username, but we need any string, and this string is then inserted into the parameter called username. That should already work fine. So if we go to the website and if we click on Xavier here, then we get to the correct component, trip list. We have the correct parameter here, so routing works. Perfect. Please test it and let me know if you have any problems. So we have the route, and now we need to deal with the trip list. And the first question that we have here in the trip list, no problem, is how do we get the parameter? Again, this is where the parameter can be found. We need to extract this parameter from the URL. And here something new and very handy comes into play. Please open our app-config.ts. And there is a nice little trick in Angular 16. Here at the provide router, you can specify with component input binding. Again, this is something that you do not need to learn by heart in the exam. You can look it up in the sample solution. During your Matura, this will already be part of your starter code. What does that with component input binding do? Well, it's very simple. We can simply receive the argument using an input. We simply say input public username question mark string. Done. Nice, right? The important thing is that this name of the variable is the same name as defined here in the route. And this does the whole mapping. This was way more complicated in previous versions of Angular. You had to define, you had to access the active route, and from the active route there was a params observable and you had to subscribe to it, and it was really complicated. Complicated to describe, complicated to remember. I always had to look it up. It wasn't a lot of fun. Now it's super, super simple. We simply can say input, we get the username, and we are good. Okay? Good, nice. So once we got the username, well, we can do it once. When the component is loaded, we simply take this username and we send it to the server and get all the trips and display the trips, right? This is what we are going to do. So we are going to implement an interface which is also new, but it's important for this use case. And this interface is called afterViewInit. It's just a so-called lifecycle method of Angular that is called after the whole component has been initialized. Again, I do not require you to know this by heart. You can simply copy it from the sample solution. Yes?
What's the difference between
ng on init happens before, after view init, and some states cannot be accessed in ng on init. You have to wait until after view init. The documentation will state exactly what these things are. I used after view init here just to be sure. To be honest, from the top of my mind, I cannot answer exactly whether our solution would work with on init too. I will try it once we enter it, okay? I will try it. Please remind me that we have to do that. Good. ng after view init. That's just an empty method. And in this empty method, we check if username is empty. Oops, sorry. If username is not empty, we can access all the trips in the database and display them on the screen. Well, very simply. Let's go to Trippin service. Here we currently have a getPeople method, and the trick is again exactly the same. So we do not need to write it by hand. You can go to my GitHub repository. You can navigate to the source folder, sorry, the app folder, open the Trippin service, and here you have the getTrips method. See it? You can simply copy it. It's line 43 to 52 in this trippin.service.typescript. Again, it's very simple. It's just setting parameters with string concatenations. This is why I don't go into details here. Good. Yes, trip is another generated modal. We discussed it in the last hour. And as I told you before, we do not handle errors yet. So remove the error handling, and with that, your code should compile. Please take a look at the code and ask questions if you don't understand it. But it's kind of obvious what we do here. Nice. Now we have the getTrips, so we can get back to our trip list component, and we can implement the rest here. And the rest is really simple, because now we are already experts in RxJS. We simply define our public data dollar, which is an observable of, can you remember, object value trip array. Let's make it conditional. And here in this.username, we can simply say this.data dollar equals getTrips. And the only thing that's missing is the Trippin service. And we get that through the constructor. Constructor private Trippin is the Trippin service, and we are good. It's a one-liner. It's really a one-liner here. Note that we do not subscribe here. Again, we do not subscribe here. Why? Because we are going to use the async pipe, and then Angular is going to do the subscription for us. Please change the code accordingly. Perfect. The TypeScript code is finished. Let's build the result component. The result component here should look similar to our people list component. So we can maybe add a header here. Now it's not people, but we will call it trip list 4. And then we can maybe, just for information purposes, add the username here so that the end user quickly sees for whom this list is. And the list itself, I don't want to bore you with writing all this HTML. So I did it for you. I'm a nice teacher. I did it for you. So trip list component HTML. And here you see the whole HTML. It's really boring stuff because it's just a lot of divs, a lot of descriptions, a lot of stuff. I mean, you had it as a homework. Those of you who tried it so far, congratulations. All the others, okay, for now, I'm giving you this code. It's in the trip list component HTML, line 26 and follows. Just paste it in. Yes, we do not have error handling yet, so remove the error handling. Here, remove the error handling. Here, remove the error handling. Here, remove the error handling. Everything else should look pretty similar to what we had before. It's not perfect yet, because here the result grid now does no longer have 5 columns, but this time we have 7 columns. So we have to redefine this result grid with a grid template columns, and we can, for instance, say repeat 7 1FR, something like this. And that should already give us a nice grid. See? If you want to make it perfect, you see I created a right aligned class here and a center aligned class. So if you want to make it perfect, you can say right should be text align right, and you can make a center, sorry, these are CSS classes. Center, and that would also be a text align center. So then you see budget is now right aligned, and here we have centered start date and end date. And that's it. Now we can go back to the people list. Look, for instance, for Russell, for a good friend. Oh, uppercase. For our good friend Russell, click on it, and we see the list of trips that Russell White did that are in the database. Works like a charm. Here is the HTML again. Please try to get it running. There shouldn't be many problems here. The point that I want to make here again and again is the reactive programming. Note that here we are simply receiving an observable and storing this observable exactly here. And then inside of the HTML, we use the async pipe in a more advanced way that we did it last year. And with that, we do not need to manually subscribe. We do not need to manually unsubscribe. It simply works. Okay, we solved our exercise so far, and now you need something to exercise. What I ask you at home to try to offer a new route for our application. This time, I want to be able to search for airports based on the airport name. So what you have to do is you have to add an Angular route, use a type ahead filter, just as we did it today with the RxJS and there's debounce time and so on. Implement a service for airport lookup and exercise again and add the CSS grid to display the information, let's say name, IATA code, location address, and location city or something like this. So this forces you to really recap all the steps that we did now 2 times. We did it for the people search, we did it for the trip search, and that enables you to do exactly the same for the airport search. Okay? It is just an exercise. It should be your opportunity to simply recap all the steps that we did today in the exercise. If necessary, take the video. I will put it online during the weekend and you can go through it, but this time you're simply looking for airports. Make sense? And next week we are going to add error handling and handling of forms in order to add data. Good? And with that, we are done. Thank you for your attention and see you next week.